The letter arrived on a gray morning, tucked beneath the wiper of my truck like a venomous snake coiled in plain sight. At first glance, it seemed like another routine notice from the HOA, another complaint about some imagined violation, another warning scribbled in sterile, bureaucratic language. But this one was different. The bold print at the top wasn't a warning at all. It was fine. Not $50. Not even $500. It demanded $250,000, payable in full within 30 days. $250,000, $250,000. For what, according to the paper? I had violated their covenants by placing unauthorized structures on land they claimed as their jurisdiction. Except the structures weren't on their land. They were on mine. And I knew it because I had the deeds, the surveys, and the records to prove it. Still, the notice didn't care about the truth. It spoke in absolutes. If I failed to pay, they threatened foreclosure, lawsuits, and liens an avalanche of destruction. Meant to bury me beneath a mountain of debt I could never climb out from under. In that moment, as I stood by my truck in the cold silence of the morning, I realized this wasn't about enforcing rules. This was war. The HOA wanted to make an example of me, to humiliate, bankrupt, and erase me. And they thought I was powerless, but what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that their entire community, every road, every cul-de-sac, every manicured patch of grass and glossy brick facade, it all sat on land that I owned, every inch of it. Their homes, their playgrounds, their precious swimming pool, all of it stood on my soil, tied to my name. I had stayed quiet about it, content to let them live their lives and collect their small dues without interference. But now they had awakened something in me. Their arrogance had forced me to pull the curtain back, to reveal the truth I had kept hidden for years. And once I did, there would be no going back. The letter trembled in my hands as I read it. Again and again, the numbers burning into my eyes. I felt the weight of the storm that was about to erupt, the collision between their greed and my silence. They had thrown the first stone, and soon they would learn just how fragile their glass castle truly was. The question wasn't whether I would fight back. The question was how far I was willing to go. And as I stared out across the rows of houses they thought they ruled over, I knew the answer was already written in stone, because the land beneath their feet was mine. And soon they would remember it. Life in the neighborhood had always looked perfect from the outside. Rows of homes stretched in neat lines, each one painted in warm earth tones chosen from an HOA-approved palette. Driveways were swept clean, flower beds trimmed into obedience, and lawns clipped to a uniform 3 inches. To any passerby, it was the picture of order, an oasis of harmony wrapped in the comfort of suburban predictability. For me, it had been more than that. I had chosen this land years before the first foundation was ever poured, back when it was still rolling fields and crooked fence posts. I had walked the soil, studied the lines of the horizon, and signed my name across deeds most people had never bothered to read. When the developers came, I let them build. When the association formed, I let them govern. I didn't interfere because it wasn't my place to manage lives. Instead, I built my own home just outside the manicured rows where the land bent into a quiet rise of oaks and maples. From my porch, I could see the rooftops stretch like a sea of shingles, a reminder of what I had allowed to grow. My mornings were simple, coffee in hand, the smell of dew rising off the grass, and the sound of birds cutting through silence before the world stirred awake. To me, peace wasn't perfection. It was space, freedom, and the quiet knowledge that everything around me had roots in my own decisions. The families in the neighborhood were pleasant enough. Parents pushing strollers down sidewalks. Children riding bikes with fluorescent helmets flashing in the sun. Retirees leaned over fences to trade bits of gossip while sprinklers clicked rhythmically across their yards. I wasn't part of their daily circle, but I watched, observed, and in my own way, protected. Their happiness gave me a sense of pride, even if they didn't know the part I had played, but within that carefully curated peace lay rules. Rules drafted not by me, but by a board of men and women who wore their authority like crowns. They patrolled the neighborhood not with uniforms, but with clipboards and citations. They decided which shades of shutters were acceptable, how many inches a hedge could grow before it was considered overgrown, and how many vehicles could sit in a driveway before it became clutter. At first, I thought of it as harmless, a group of neighbors trying to preserve the beauty of their community, yet there were signs even then. A whisper of arrogance in their meetings, a flicker of control in their eyes when they spoke about violations. I remember overhearing one board member at the corner cafe laughing about a family who had dared to plant sunflowers taller than the approved limit. "Rules are rules," he had said, as though those 3 words justified stripping joy from someone's backyard. Still, I brushed it aside. After all, I wasn't bound by them, not in the same way. My land stood outside their lines, my home beyond their reach. Or so I believed. The seasons turned quietly and life unfolded as it always had. Spring brought blossoms that painted the sidewalks in pink and white. Summer filled the air with barbecues, the scent of charcoal drifting over fences. Autumn set the trees aflame with red and gold, while winter laid a hush of snow across roofs and driveways. The neighborhood pulsed with cycles of ordinary beauty, and I let myself be lulled by its rhythm. But beneath that rhythm, subtle cracks began to form. It started with the stories. A widow was fined for leaving her trash cans by the curb too long. After pickup, a young couple was warned for parking their RV in the driveway during the week they had family visiting. A retired veteran threatened with legal action because his flagpole didn't meet the exact measurements in the HOA guidelines. Each time, the families grumbled, paid their dues, or reluctantly complied. The board grew bolder with every unchecked action, their confidence swelling like a storm cloud on the horizon. I noticed it, but it wasn't my battle. I told myself people would stand up when they'd had enough. That freedom had a way of pushing back when cornered. Yet the longer I watched, the more I realized how fear worked. Fear of losing one's home, fear of legal fees, fear of becoming the next example in the HOA's endless pursuit of dominance. People whispered behind closed doors, but few spoke aloud. And then, there was me. Though my house stood apart, my land was not invisible. The board knew of me. They saw the trucks that came and went, the tools I stored, and the outbuildings I had built over the years. To them, I was not just an outsider. I was a reminder that control had limits. And for people obsessed with order, limits were intolerable. I felt their eyes more often as months passed. Board members pausing at the end of my driveway during their so-called walkthroughs. Letters slid into my mailbox, not fines yet, but reminders about keeping appearances aligned with the neighborhood standard. They weren't rules that applied to me, but the implication was clear. They wished they did. Still, I held my silence. It wasn't time. What the board could never grasp was that ownership is not always visible. They saw fences, sidewalks, and neatly drawn property lines, but they didn't see the deeper truth. They didn't see the deeds stacked in my files or the legal chains that tethered their entire world to my name. I thought about it often. Sitting on my porch as twilight descended, the lampposts would flicker on in neat succession, casting halos over the pavement, and I would wonder how long it would take before their hunger for power pushed them to test me. Before, they mistook my patience for weakness. It came sooner than I expected. One autumn evening, I noticed a family quietly moving out of a house 2 streets over. Their children carried boxes smaller than their arms, their parents avoiding the stares of neighbors. I later learned the HOA had driven them out, with fines they couldn't keep up with, penalties that piled up until foreclosure was the only option. The board saw it as a victory. I saw it as a warning. The balance had shifted. The neighborhood wasn't just orderly anymore. It was fearful, submissive, and tightly leashed. And when people live under fear, all it takes is one spark to ignite rebellion. I didn't know then that the spark would be me. The first fine hit like a hammer dropped in the middle of the night. The paper sat in my mailbox, folded too neatly, as though the person who delivered it knew exactly what they were doing. It accused me of having unauthorized structures on property belonging to the HOA, a shed, a workshop, even the old barn at the edge of the field. According to them, all of it fell under their authority. I laughed when I first read it. a bitter, humorless laugh that echoed in the stillness of my yard. They had no jurisdiction, no claim, no right, but the laughter faded quickly as I looked closer. The letter wasn't just a warning, it carried a fine, and not a small one. The board demanded hundreds of thousands, threatening liens, foreclosure, and even the forced seizure of my home if I refused. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, pulling out file after file. Deeds and surveys spread like a fortress around me. Every piece of paper, every line of ink confirmed what I already knew. The land was mine. Not theirs, mine. The next day I walked into their office. A sterile room with white walls, framed certificates, and the faint smell of ink and arrogance. Behind the desk sat the board president, a man who wore his power like a second skin. His smile was polite, but his eyes burnt with condescension. "I think you've made a mistake," I said, laying my papers down in front of him. "These structures are on my land. Here are the deeds. Here's the proof." He barely looked at them. He leaned back, folding his hands. "Rules are rules, and the board has decided." That phrase again, that cursed phrase, "rules are rules," as though words scribbled in a binder gave them divine authority. I picked up my papers, met his gaze, and told him something I hadn't planned to say out loud. "You should be careful. You're standing on my ground. All of you are." His smile faltered just for a second. But arrogance is a stubborn disease, and he recovered quickly. "Pay the fine or face the consequences." The battle lines were drawn. The weeks that followed were chaos. Lawyers swarmed. The board tried everything: denial, intimidation, desperate attempts to twist the law, but the law was clear. The land was mine, and with it, every ounce of leverage they had ever claimed. One by one, their threats dissolved into dust. The lawsuits they promised never came. The fines vanished like smoke. And then came the final blow. I sent a letter. Not a warning, not a threat, a declaration. The HOA was dissolved, effective immediately. Their offices closed, their funds frozen, their authority stripped away. Every family, every homeowner was free from their chains. The board members who had strutted like rulers were left powerless. Their empire crumbled to nothing. I remember walking through the neighborhood that evening. The air was different, lighter, and freer. Neighbors came out of their homes, children laughed in the streets, and flags waved without fear of citation. People thanked me, shook my hand, and some even cried. But I told them the truth. I didn't do this out of gratitude. I did it because no one should live in fear of the ground they stand on. As the sun set, I stood at the edge of the cul-de-sac watching families reclaim their lives. For years, the board had thought they were untouchable, that rules written in binders mattered more than freedom. But in the end, they had forgotten one simple truth. Power means nothing without ground to stand on, and the ground was mine. Always had been. Always would be. The board learnt too late what arrogance costs. The families learnt what freedom feels like. And I finally stepped out of the shadows, not as their enemy, but as the man who reminded them where true ownership lies. Because in the quiet war between control and liberty, there is only one side worth standing on. And sometimes all it takes is one man, one voice, and one undeniable truth to bring an empire of fear crashing to the ground. Weeks passed and the harassment escalated. More letters, more threats. Men in suits knocking on my door, speaking of liens and court summons. Neighbors began to whisper when I walked down the street, their faces a mix of fear and pity. The board thought they were tightening the noose, but what they couldn't see was that they were walking themselves toward the edge of a cliff. I began preparing quietly, contacting lawyers, collecting every survey, every deed, every dusty record buried in county offices. My nights became endless stretches of paper and ink, my days filled with quiet observation. I watched board members strut through the neighborhood like kings, issuing citations for grass half an inch too long and for holiday decorations left out a day past the deadline. And all the while, I kept my silence, waiting for the right moment. It came at the annual HOA meeting. The hall was filled with residents, with folding chairs lined in neat rows. The board sat at the front like royalty, shuffling papers, clearing throats, and preparing their speeches. I sat in the back, quiet, unnoticed. They began with their usual performance talk of budgets, enforcement, and improvements. But then came the moment they had been waiting for, my case. The president stood, his voice smooth, carrying the tone of a man who believed himself untouchable. He spoke of my violations, of the fines I had refused to pay, of the board's intent to seize my property. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Eyes turned toward me. That was when I stood. Slowly, deliberately, I walked to the front of the room. My boots echoed against the floor, each step pulling the air tighter. When I reached the podium, I laid down a stack of papers so heavy it landed with a thud. These, I said, my voice cutting through the silence, are the deeds, the surveys, the records. Every foot of land this neighborhood sits on, every house, every road, every manicured patch of grass, you're all standing on my property. Not yours, not the board, mine. The room erupted, gasps, whispers, a woman's voice breaking the silence. Is that true? I turned to the crowd, my eyes scanning the faces of families who had suffered under the board's rule. For years I've let them govern, I stayed silent. I let them believe they had power. But make no mistake, your homes are on my soil, and these people you call leaders? I pointed to the board, their faces pale, their arrogance crumbling. They've been nothing but tenants pretending to be kings. The president tried to interrupt, his voice cracking with forced authority. This is nonsense, lies meant to. I slammed another paper onto the podium. Here is the county seal. Here are the signatures of the developers who sold the land. Every legal chain leads back to me. So tell me, how do you plan to find the man who owns the ground under your feet? Silence, the kind of silence that weighs on shoulders and steals the breath from lungs. The residents stared at me, then at the board, then back again. Doubt spread like fire, and in that moment, the board's power shattered.
This was just one story, but the next one will be even more dramatic. Are you ready? Then you need to subscribe to HOA Stories 87 right now. Like this video, share it with your friends, and hit the bell because the next story might sound a little too close to home.